my yarny friends, I'm Sara Sach, and welcome back to my crochet channel. Today's video is another edition of This or That. And what this or that is, is I ask you a question, I give you a couple of answers, and then you get to put your opinion of that answer down in that comment section. And it's really important that you do comment because I can learn from you, you can learn from me, and then we can all learn from each other. All right, and so today's question is a little bit more in depth than just this or that. The question really is this: do you always count your stitches? Do you measure as you go? Or do you just wing it? And I know sometimes we do just wing it. I've been known to do that from time to time. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what is tension, what is gauge, how can I count my stitches better? And I have a whole list of questions here. These are questions that I got just in the last month. Okay, this one said, I am so frustrated. I followed the pattern. I used the same yarn, the same weight yarn. I used the same hook size, and it's not working out. Sometimes they say it's too big. Sometimes it comes out too small. And so we're going to talk about how we can work on that and fix that. Some other questions that go right along with this is, do I have to count every stitch? Do I have to measure? How do I measure? How do I count? What's tension? What's gauge? Okay? And then it's just a lot of questions about how can I count or check my tension better. And so we're going to talk about this whole conversation in today's video. Don't worry, it's still going to be a short one, but we're going to hit some of the highlights to help us keep track better and to help us with our gauge and tension. All right, first of all, let's talk a little bit about hook sizes. So I just have a series of hooks here. F, G, H, I, J. They go from a 3.75 to a 6 millimeter. And you can see that the shaft of each one is a different size. And if you take the smallest one and the largest one, you can see there's a big difference. And the size of your hook does make a difference. If you made a hat and it's way too big, go down a hook size or two. If you made a hat and it's way too small, go up a hook size or two. But before you make the whole hat, use a tape measure and measure as you go. You can measure how many rows you've done if it's long enough. You can measure around to see if it's going to fit the head of the person that you're making it for. Because something that we need to remember is every pattern designer has a different tension or gauge. Tension is how tightly that we stitch. Okay, I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to grab my H hook because this is a medium weight number 4. All right, so let's just make a row of chains. All right, so I always tell you when you begin with a row of chains to make that row just a little bit loose. So let's just chain. All right, so I've chained. I don't know how many. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do 10. All right, now I'm going to count again because always count twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then take a stitch marker and mark your stitches. A lot of times people say, stitch markers are only good for knitting. You don't need them in crochet. I disagree. You can count your stitches, mark them every 10 or 20, and that will help you keep track of your stitches. Okay, now I want to show you, sorry about the scratchy voice, the difference if I go up a hook size. Okay, so this is with H. Let's just grab our J hook just so we can have a really big difference that you can see. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make our slip knot and we're going to chain 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now look at the difference in how that's chained. And so you can see there is a difference between the H hook and the J hook just making a chain. All right, I'm going to cut this one, and I'm going to grab the smallest one over here I have. That's an F, and we're going to do 10 chains as well. So we'll make that slip knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, so we have the H hook, we have the J hook, and here is the F hook, which is a 3.75. And you can see, just even in the way that it looks, it's a much tighter chain. And that's what tension has to do with. Now, you can adjust your tension by changing your hook size. And where the hook size is measured is on this portion of the hook. And of course, we have these two that are in between those sizes. I just wanted you to see how changing the hook can make a difference. And remember, we don't all have the same tension. There are some pattern designers that I love their patterns, but I always go up a hook size because they stitch much tighter than I do. And there are other designers who stitch looser than I do, and so I know to go down a hook size when I work their patterns. And remember, to keep count, you can use your stitch markers, especially if you're beginning with a row of foundation chains or a row of just foundation stitches, like a double crochet foundation or single crochet foundation, especially if you have to do like 150 for a blanket or something. And so it's nice to mark them every 10. And I love these jelly ones. These are, I bought these at Hobby Lobby, but I don't remember what brand they are. But they're actually in the knitting section. They have like the section of all the crochet hooks and then all the knitting hooks like right next to each other. These jelly ones I found, and I really love them. They're bendy, they're easy to work with, and they came all in pink in this one. This one's green because I have another box that they're all different colors that I bought because I couldn't find that box. So I bought another box, and then I found the other box. All right, now let's talk a little bit about measuring. And this is where it's very important. Say you're making a blanket, and you're using a J hook, and you want that blanket to be 4 feet by 4 feet. Measure as you go. Now, of course, that's just 4 inches, but measuring as you go makes all the difference in making sure that whatever you're going to make fits. And I have people tell me all the time, I've never measured and I have perfect gauge. So let's talk gauge for just a second. So on your labels, this is just a Premier Just Yarn Value Yarn. And on all, I grabbed this one because the squares are nice and big. All right, so it's a medium 4. And then you have these 2 squares. Almost every yarn manufacturer maker has this for you. This is all about knitting. You need to knit a 10 by 10 centimeter square. And it tells you that it's 4 by 4, which means 18 stitches by 24 is going to get you a 5 millimeter square using your US 8 needles. Okay, now on this one, your 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inches. This is centimeters, this is inches. Okay, this is the crochet hook. And they're telling you to use a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook, which is a USI or 9. And you're going to need to stitch 12 single crochets and 15 rows. Here you've got 18 stitches in 24 rows because this is knitting. This is crochet. And if you make a swatch that is 12 single crochets for 15 rows, it should measure 4 by 4 inches or 10 by 10 centimeters. And that is how you can check your gauge. And so just to clarify, your tension is how tightly that you stitch. Your gauge is how it works up on that square, like I showed you on that skein of yarn, how many stitches the yarn tells you to make and how many rows to equal that 4 by 4 inch or 10 centimeter square will tell you if your gauge works up properly. Okay, so it's a good idea when you get a new yarn that you've never worked with before to go ahead and just make up a quick swatch. I used to do that all the time, and then I would save all those swatches, and then I put them all together and make a blanket. I mean, it's a great way not to use up your yarn and make something out of it. You can always take it out as well. But it's really, really important. And these questions I get on probably a daily basis. And a lot of times it has to do with other people's patterns. They'll say, like I said, like this one person wrote me, said, I am so frustrated. I followed their pattern. I used the same yarn, the same weight, and the same crochet hook, and mine is either too small or too big. And I get that all the time, even with my patterns. I have had people post on YouTube. One person will say it's too big. The other person will say it's too small. It's just because we all have different gauge or different tension. And again, tension is how tightly we stitch. The gauge is how it measures out, just in case you're wondering about that particular thing. And I will tell you, stitch markers are your friend, even in crochet. All right? I always have, when I'm working on a project, my stitch markers handy and my tape measure, because I measure everything as I go. And I told y'all years ago when I first started crocheting, if you followed me, the last 7 years that I've been on YouTube, I've said several times, when I first started crocheting, I didn't know you were supposed to count your stitches. I borrowed a book from the library, and it didn't say anything about counting your stitches. It was just all about techniques and the way to do things and learning the basic stitches. And so I just measured everything. If I was making a scarf, I measured it out to see how wide I want it. And then as I made rows, I just measured the length. And so then I learned later, a couple years later, you're supposed to be counting your stitches, So I agree with that. You should count your stitches. And that's why I say keep your stitch markers handy to help you keep track. And then, of course, measure as you go to make sure your tension is proper. And when I say proper, I mean on cue, or like what the pattern is telling you. If it's telling you you need a 12 by 12 square and yours isn't a 12 by 12 square, you can adjust that by changing your hook size up or down. Okay, so let's bottom line the question. And this was a little bit tricky, isn't it? Do you measure as you go? Do you count your stitches? Or do you just wing it? I'm going to be honest with you here. Sometimes if I'm just making a washcloth or a towel and I want it to be a certain length or width, I may not count the stitches, especially if it's just rows of single crochets or half double crochets or double crochets. I might just go ahead and just measure it out to make sure I do enough rows where I can get a nice square, put a trim on it. Because I love to make washcloths with my leftover yarns so that I have lots of them for when we have guests over. And I always give my guests one of them, take a washcloth with you so you can remember us by. And that's a great way to get rid of a lot of your leftover cotton yarns. All right, so like I said, the question is, do you count those stitches? Do you measure as you go, or do you just wing it? Well, thanks for being with me today, and I hope I answered some of those questions, because like I said, I get these questions all the time. And so I wanted to just make one video and try to answer all these questions and try to do it in a very simple way that everybody can understand, because you don't want to be frustrated in your crochet journey. You want to enjoy what you're doing, enjoy what you're making, and have great results. And remember, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes confidence. All right, and we want to have confidence in our yarn craft. So I'll see you next week for another edition of This or That.